Under the blistering sun of Ouagadougou, the revolution square pulsed with a chaotic energy. Vendors shouted over the rhythmic beat of traditional drums, while the crowd swelled in anticipation. That day was unlike any other. Whispers of confrontation and change floated on the wind. At the center of it all stood PLO Lumumba, an aging yet defiant intellectual, renowned across the continent for his fearless Pan-African rhetoric. His sharp eyes pierced through the haze, bearing the weight of decades spent battling neo-colonialism and betrayal. But today, his words would do more than stir hearts, they would provoke powerful reactions. In the shadowed wings of power, Ibrahim Traoré stood watching. Just 35 years old, he had risen from the ranks of the military to become the head of Burkina Faso through a coup that shocked the world. His goal was clear: liberate his nation from foreign control and chart a new path for Africa, one of independence, unity, and self-reliance. Yet not everyone welcomed his vision. Some hailed him as a liberator. Others, especially among the elite, whispered of authoritarianism and recklessness. Mariama Diallo, a seasoned investigative journalist, weaved her way through the crowd with practiced ease. She wasn't just covering a speech, she was chasing a moment that might define the next chapter of African history. She had her recorder placed near the podium, heart pounding. Whatever Lumumba says today, she murmured to herself, it might ignite a fire we can't put out. Nearby, General Kabore stood among fellow officers, his face unreadable. He respected Traoré's bravery, but the stakes worried him. Are we trading one master for another? He wondered aloud, eyes scanning the restless crowd. His loyalty was not in question, but his hope was fading. Behind the scenes, Karim Diallo, a veteran diplomat, was already working damage control. Traoré's severing of ties with the West, combined with Lumumba's fiery rhetoric, had rattled potential allies. Karim's challenge was monumental: bridge two ideologies pulling in opposite directions, both equally radical, both equally proud. Tension buzzed like static in the air as Lumumba approached the podium. The crowd fell into a hushed silence. Even the drummers paused, as if the earth itself held its breath. My brothers and sisters, Lumumba began, his voice deep, slow, and deliberate, today we face a choice. Will we stand as sovereigns, or live as puppets dangling from foreign strings? The words struck like thunder. Some in the audience gasped. Others cheered wildly. But what came next shook even the doubters. I once feared this young man behind me, Lumumba said, turning to gesture toward Ibrahim Traoré. I feared his youth, his audacity, his war against Western dominance. But now I see more clearly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Traoré is not just a soldier. He is not just a president. He is a mirror, reflecting a truth that many of us have refused to see. That unity, dignity, and new African money, yes, our own currency, not dictated by foreign banks, is not a fantasy. It is a necessity. Gasps turned to stunned silence. Even Traoré's advisors exchanged confused glances. Was this praise? Lumumba continued, we have criticized him for breaking ties with the West, for refusing the conditional aid and toxic loans. But we forgot, a man who refuses to beg is not dangerous, he is free. Traoré, standing still and silent, clenched his fists, not out of anger, but something else. Emotion. Rarely seen. For so long, he had been vilified, called a radical, a rebel without foresight. But now, the words of a legendary intellectual gave legitimacy to his vision. New African money, Lumumba said firmly, is not just about coins and bills. It's about control. Control of our resources, our trade, our future. Traoré's dream is not his alone. It is ours to claim. The crowd erupted. Cheers burst from every corner of the square. Women wept. Men embraced. For a moment, the usual divisions, tribal, political, generational, dissolved in a wave of shared pride. And as Lumumba ended his speech with a salute to African unity and African self-reliance, the silence that followed was holy. Later, in the presidential compound, Traore met with Karim Diallo. "I didn't expect that," he admitted, still stunned. "Neither did I," Karim replied. "But now you have a responsibility heavier than ever before." Indeed, Lumumba's unexpected endorsement turned the tides. News of the speech spread like wildfire across Africa. In Senegal, young activists painted murals of Traore and Lumumba shaking hands. In Ghana, professors rewrote lectures to include the Ouagadougou Declaration. In South Africa, local banks began discussions on inter-African currency frameworks, drawing inspiration from the very term New African Money. It was no longer just a Burkinabe dream. It was becoming a continental call. Western ambassadors, rattled and unsure, began sending back revised assessments. "Traore is not isolated anymore," one memo read. "He is becoming a symbol. And symbols are harder to defeat than armies." In the following weeks, Traore doubled down on local investments, renewable energy, community farming cooperatives, and regional trade deals independent of Western oversight. His boldness, once criticized, was now contagious. Other leaders began to follow suit, quietly at first, then with increasing confidence. The African Union, once fractured and riddled with hesitation, found new momentum. Calls for African self-reliance dominated policy meetings. Youth movements erupted with energy, singing songs not of exile or protest, but of return, of rebuilding, of rising. It began with misunderstanding. It rose through confrontation. And it ended, it began anew, with a shared vision. A vision where Ibrahim Traoré, no longer seen as just a soldier or rebel, stood as a leader of a continent's rebirth. A leader who, against all odds, proved that belief in Africa was never misplaced, only delayed. The applause rang loud and fierce, but it was not unanimous. While many in the square cheered Lumumba's fiery speech, others shifted uncomfortably, disturbed by the intensity of his tone. Mariama Diallo, still stationed near the podium with her recorder, watched it all unfold with a journalist's trained eye. She sensed it in the crowd, those wounds weren't just political. They were historical, generational, and deeply personal. "He's pouring fuel on a fire that never really died," she muttered, scribbling furiously into her notebook. Backstage, Ibrahim Traoré stood in the shadows, watching the scene with a face carved from stone. No flicker of emotion escaped him, but inside, the pressure was rising. Lumumba had spoken a truth that could not be denied. But it was wrapped in confrontation, a dagger disguised as a speech. "This is not just a speech," Traoré murmured to himself. "It's a war of narratives." His inner circle was already at work, preparing a response, a statement, a public address, maybe even a policy shift to counter the impact of Lumumba's accusations. Traoré could not allow a single man's words to destabilize the fragile structure he had spent months building. His rise to power had been sudden, controversial, but necessary. He saw himself not as a dictator, but as a surgeon, cutting deep to remove a foreign infection. Yet even among his own ranks, doubt crept in. General Kabore, a loyal yet pragmatic officer, stood in the corner, visibly uneasy. He respected Traoré. He had fought beside him, bled with him. But now, hearing Lumumba's accusations, about neocolonialism, broken promises, and the risk of repeating the past, he felt a weight in his chest. "If we start doubting our own revolution now," he whispered to another soldier, "we might lose more than power. We might lose purpose." Meanwhile, Karim Diallo, ever the diplomat, was doing what he did best, trying to keep the peace. He had served under 3 governments, survived 2 coups, and negotiated peace accords during times of civil unrest. But this ideological war between 2 African titans, felt more dangerous than bullets. "We don't need confrontation," he told one of his aides, "we need clarity. We need unity. We need a path forward." But the crowd wasn't waiting for clarity. Lumumba's voice boomed again, "You're not liberating us from colonialism, you're trading it for neocolonialism with a new mask." A wave of gasps and angry murmurs passed through the square. His words were bold, maybe too bold. Some clapped, others booed. The air grew heavy. Traoré's critics felt emboldened. His supporters felt attacked. The plaza, once electric with hope, now buzzed with tension. As the speech ended, the crowd began to break apart, but the aftershocks rippled long after. People debated in the streets, in cafes, under trees. On radio stations and social media, the discourse exploded. The words neocolonialism, African unity, and self-reliance trended across Francophone and Anglophone Africa alike. Something had been unleashed. Mariama, walking back through the dusty streets, recorder still clutched in her hand, couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just politics anymore. This is soul deep, she thought. This is about the very future of what it means to be African. In the privacy of his war room, Traoré sat with his most trusted advisors. His jaw clenched, voice low, but unshaken. "We can't afford to look weak," he said. "We must reaffirm our stance. We are not Western puppets. We are the builders of our own continent." His words were met with nods, but not from everyone. General Kabore remained silent. His loyalty had not faded, but his conviction had cracked. As he studied the strategic maps pinned to the wall, he whispered to himself, "We ignore Lumumba's warnings at our own peril. If we don't confront the gaps in our vision, we'll lose the support of our own people." Karim Diallo moved swiftly to organize an informal meeting. He gathered representatives from both camps, Lumumba's supporters and Traoré's inner circle. It was a risky move, but he believed dialogue could still prevent collapse. "We must find common ground," he pleaded during the meeting. "African unity cannot be built on division. Our people don't care who wins a debate, they care about results, dignity, and independence." Still, neither side was quick to compromise. Lumumba, despite the backlash, stood firm. "I stirred discomfort because comfort has killed our spirit," he told those present. "Our leaders must be held accountable, even if they wear our colors." But something had shifted. Days later, in a surprise national broadcast, Ibrahim Traoré addressed the nation, not with retaliation, but with recalibration. "Lumumba was right about one thing," he said calmly. "We must never allow power to blind us from our people's pain. Our revolution is not only political, it must also be economic, cultural, and spiritual." He announced a series of reforms, a public audit of foreign contracts, an accelerated plan for new African money to replace the CFA franc, and a continental initiative for food and energy sovereignty. The room fell silent. The country held its breath. And then, applause. Not everyone agreed. Not everyone trusted. But for the first time in months, hope re-entered the conversation. Across the continent, Lumumba's critics now called him a necessary provocateur. Traoré's critics began to see him not as a military brute, but as a man willing to adapt and grow. The phrase, African self-reliance, no longer sounded like a dream, it felt like a destination. Perhaps the fire Lumumba lit was not meant to burn down Traoré's house, but to forge the steel of his leadership. In the end, it was not about who shouted louder, but who listened deeper. And from the depths of this ideological clash, a new voice emerged, not Lumumba's, not Traoré's, but Africa's. One that spoke of unity, dignity, and a future finally defined by Africans themselves. I cannot remain silent in the face of decisions that compromise our sovereignty, Lumumba declared to Mariama Diallo in a brief yet electric interview. His conviction was unwavering, etched into his voice like stone into marble. Yet, with each bold statement, he seemed to push away potential allies. Tensions in Ouagadougou mounted by the hour, and rumors of a possible direct confrontation between Lumumba and President Ibrahim Traoré began swirling like a dry season storm. The city's air was thick with uncertainty, something was coming, and everyone could feel it. Mariama Madi Diallo, ever the sharp observer, was crafting an explosive exposé. She knew her article could ignite a national debate. Every word she penned carried weight, and she didn't take that lightly. The Revolution Square, once just a gathering space, had now transformed into the epicenter of the ideological clash. Protesters emerged, brandishing signs that echoed Lumumba's rhetoric. Sovereignty or submission, one read in bold red letters. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a challenge. Supporters of Lumumba clashed verbally with loyalists of Traoré. Tension gripped the streets. One wrong move, one spark, and civil peace could shatter. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Traoré made a decisive move. He called a national press conference at the government headquarters. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. With military composure and unwavering eye contact, he addressed the nation. "We will not retreat," he said, his voice firm, "not before external pressure, not before internal threats. Burkina Faso belongs to its people, not to foreign creditors, nor to ideologues with no plan for implementation." Some applauded his strength. Others saw only arrogance. From the crowd, Mariama Diallo wrote feverishly, recording the shift in public tone. A president on the defensive. A population torn between two visions. Meanwhile, Karim Diallo worked behind the scenes, orchestrating a secret meeting between Lumumba and representatives of Traoré's government. The room where they met was dim, the air dense with tension. From the start, it was clear, this would not be a polite dialogue. "You are gambling with our future," Lumumba spat, slamming his fist on the table. "You make strategic alliances without consulting the people. You wave flags of independence while dealing in secrecy." Traoré's generals responded with restrained fury. "You're blinded by your ideology," one barked. "We are building real systems, agriculture, local defense, financial reforms." "What are you building, Lumumba?" "Speeches." General Kabore, once quiet and composed, now voiced public doubt for the first time. "If we keep ignoring the people's fears," he warned Traoré's side, "we will lose the support we bled to earn." The room fell into a tense silence. Lumumba saw it. His words had cut deep, but now they were bleeding allies. Later that evening, in a private moment with Karim, Lumumba confessed something rare. "Maybe I was too harsh," he said, looking away. "But someone had to say it." That admission, quiet, personal, human, marked a shift. The firebrand philosopher now saw the limits of confrontation. His message was not wrong. But his delivery had become a wedge. At the same time, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his office, tracing his fingers across a large map of Africa pinned to the wall. His eyes lingered on the West African region. His thoughts drifted. "Maybe it's time to rethink," he whispered. He wasn't weak. He wasn't surrendering. But he understood something had to change. The conflict was reaching its crescendo. The people needed resolution, not victory, not defeat. Just hope. That's when it happened. After weeks of ideological warfare, miscommunication, and escalating tension, Lumumba and Traore agreed to meet face to face. No generals. No advisors. Just two men, two visions, and the weight of a continent pressing down on their shoulders. The location? Revolution Square. Symbolic, raw, and surrounded by thousands of onlookers holding their breath. They met under the open sky. No podium. No microphone. Just conversation. Whispers turned into silence. Even the birds seemed to hush. Lumumba spoke first. I challenged you because I feared what you were becoming. Traore nodded, his expression unreadable. And I resisted your words, he replied, because I feared they would tear down what we've built. Then came the moment no one expected. Lumumba extended his hand. Maybe the problem isn't your vision, he said, maybe it's how we failed to build it together. Traore paused. Then grasped the hand firmly. In that case, let's build it right. A united Africa. An Africa with its own currency. Our own voice. Our own future. The crowd erupted. Not in chaos, but in awe. In that single gesture, the narrative transformed. From rivalry to alliance. From suspicion to unity. That moment would be etched in history. In the weeks that followed, joint task forces were established. Economic forums were launched to discuss the framework of new African money. Agricultural and infrastructure programs were merged under a single initiative, African Self-Reliance Now. The African Union, once skeptical, pledged support. And Mariama Diallo? Her article, titled From Division to Dignity, How Traore and Lumumba Redefined African Unity, went viral in 3 languages within 48 hours. Even General Kabore, once doubtful, became a lead advisor on reform policy. Karim Diallo was appointed as head mediator for inter-African integration programs. Something new had been born. Not just a political truce, but a model. A model for how African leaders could disagree, challenge, clash, and still come back to the table for the people they serve. It began with misunderstanding. Escalated into confrontation. But in the end, it became a turning point. Not just for Burkina Faso. For Africa. And the world was watching. Lumumba finally acknowledged that his confrontational approach may have gone too far. Yet, as he locked eyes with Ibrahim Traoré, his voice remained firm. We cannot trade one system of oppression for another, he said. His words were not an accusation this time, but a plea, a reminder of the responsibility both men shared in shaping Africa's future. Across from him, Traoré nodded slowly. The weight of leadership bore heavily on his shoulders. Some of our strategic decisions must be reconsidered, he admitted. Especially those that impact our people directly. It was not a concession of defeat, but of wisdom, one that marked the beginning of sincere dialogue between two powerful minds. Karim Diallo watched the exchange with cautious relief. His diplomatic instincts told him that this meeting, though brief, could shift the political landscape of the region. Dialogue, he whispered to Mariama Diallo standing beside him, is always the path forward. Mariama, documenting every word, every gesture, knew she was witnessing something historic. Her pen flew across the pages of her notebook, capturing a scene that would become a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but for Pan-African unity itself. Nearby, General Kabore stood silently but supportively behind Traoré. The transformation unfolding before him was not lost. He had once feared Lumumba's rhetoric, but now saw the legitimacy in his concerns. We must listen to our people, he declared later during a private military council meeting. For the first time, his colleagues didn't resist his words. Instead, they nodded in agreement. Kabore's shift in position marked a subtle yet powerful turning point within the military leadership. A space opened, small but vital, for reform, transparency, and civic involvement. The once rigid Ility. Mariama, back at her desk that night, pored over her notes. She titled her article, "The Choice Between Division and Unity, A Nation at the Crossroads." In her reflection, she captured the emotional impact of the last few hours, the confrontation, the hesitation, and finally, the handshake that changed everything. Yes, the handshake. As the meeting concluded, Lumumba and Traore stood. They looked at one another, not as rivals, but as Africans bound by duty. Their hands met in a firm, unflinching grip. The gesture, caught on camera and broadcast across the continent, became symbolic of something far greater than reconciliation. It was a signal that two visions could coexist, and even converge, for the good of a nation. The crowd, at first hesitant, broke into cautious applause. It wasn't wild, nor jubilant, but it carried something more meaningful, hope. Yes, the future remained uncertain. The road ahead was steep. But something had shifted in the soul of Burkina Faso. In the days that followed, Revolution Square saw not protests, but quiet gatherings of discussion. Citizens sat in circles, talking about sovereignty, leadership, and what self-reliance could really mean in their daily lives. The echoes of Lumumba and Traore's words still resonated. People began to ask new questions, not just about politics, but about purpose. Mariama's article spread like wildfire, cited in university classrooms from Bamako to Dakar, shared on social media across the diaspora. She emphasized the importance of dialogue, not as weakness, but as a revolutionary act. When leaders listen, she wrote, they give power back to the people. Karim Diallo, too, continued his work with quiet determination. He held meetings with economic advisors, community leaders, and even international observers. His mission was simple: ensure that the promises made were not just spoken, but fulfilled. The future depends on us, he told a group of visiting diplomats. We must transform dialogue into cooperation. Speeches into policy. Dreams into infrastructure. Karim became a symbol of Africa's new diplomacy, firm, visionary, but deeply rooted in the grassroots. Meanwhile, General Kabore took steps to reform the internal structure of the military government. He demanded greater transparency in decision-making, open channels for civil consultation, and pushed for participatory governance. His stance inspired a wave of similar reforms in local provinces, where governors began hosting open town halls. But the most visible change came from President Traore himself. In a bold move, he announced a nationwide economic initiative rooted in new African money, a local currency backed by gold, regional trade agreements, and a joint fund between neighboring Sahel countries. It wasn't just economic policy, it was a declaration of independence from centuries of financial dependency. Africa, Traore said in a speech, will no longer be told what it can afford. We will define our own worth. This is our money, our future. His plan, developed in partnership with economists and Pan-African organizations, laid the foundation for a self-reliant system, a vision where Burkina Faso could export innovation,